Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really urgent legal move, one with huge implications for how identity is recognized by the federal government.
That's right. We're unpacking this high-stakes fight over passports, gender markers, and it's all happening very quickly.
Exactly. Our sources detail the immediate clash, the wider policy picture.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to give you the context you need for this story. It broke just yesterday, September 19th, 2025. The Trump administration filed an emergency petition straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. SCOTUS.
Yep.
They want a super fast ruling to bring back a rule that says passport applicants must list their sex as assigned at birth.
Which means blocking other options, like reflecting gender identity or using that neutral X marker.
Right, explicitly blocking them.
And look, this isn't your standard appeal process. Going straight to the Supreme Court like this, using what people call the shadow docket, that's a big deal.
Why is that so significant?
It signals this is a top priority for them. They want the court to act now outside the usual slower appeal routes.
So it kind of bypasses the normal steps.
Exactly. And the move itself tells you how intense the political and legal stakes are. They're pushing for a fundamental change in how the government defines gender on, arguably, its most important ID document.
Okay, let's unpack this. So what exactly are they asking SCOTUS for? Why the big rush? And maybe most importantly, what are the actual legal arguments they're using?
Well, first, the specific ask. They want the Supreme Court right now to lift an injunction, basically pause a lower court's block on their policy.
So they can enforce the birth sex rule immediately.
Immediately, while the rest of the case maybe continues later.
Okay, and you mentioned speed. Let's talk about the frequency of these appeals, too.
Yeah, it's striking. This specific petition, it's the 28th emergency request they've sent to the Supreme Court.
Wait, 28? In how long?
In just 8 months, since they took office.
Wow, 28 in 8 months. That's a lot. What does that number tell us? Why should you, listening, care about that?
It tells you there's a clear pattern, a strategy. Using the shadow docket this often is a way to try and get around lower courts that might be blocking their policies.
Ah, okay. If a district judge says no.
They hope the Supreme Court, with its current makeup, will say yes and quickly. So it shows two things. They're rolling out policies very fast, and those policies are hitting legal roadblocks almost instantly.
Which forces them to bank on SCOTUS basically being their quick fix.
You could put it that way, their immediate policy backstop, yeah.
And the roadblock that triggered this specific appeal came from a judge in Massachusetts.
That's right, U.S. District Judge Julia Kobik, a Biden appointee. Back in June, she issued an injunction against this passport policy.
And an injunction means stop, like stop right now.
Exactly. It immediately prevents the policy from being implemented. Judge Kobik ruled that making people use only the sex assigned at birth on passports likely violates the constitutional rights of transgender and non-binary Americans.
So her ruling kept the door open for M, F, or X markers?
Correct. It allowed the status quo, the more inclusive options, to continue. And the administration is now arguing to SCOTUS that keeping that injunction in place is causing immediate, irreparable harm.
Harm to the government.
Harm to the United States is
Yes.
how they frame it, which is why they say they need this emergency ruling.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us right to their core arguments. What reasons are they actually giving the Supreme Court? Solicitor General John Sauer laid them out. This is where it gets really interesting, you said.
It is, because it's about how they're framing identity itself legally. There are basically three main pillars to their argument.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first, and maybe the most fundamental, is about what they call inaccurate sex designations.
Inaccurate, okay.
Their filing literally says, private citizens cannot force the government to use inaccurate sex designations on identification documents that fail to reflect the person's biological sex.
So the core there is biological sex. But how are they defining that in the legal filing? Because, science and medicine often talk about sex characteristics being more complex than a simple binary.
Right. But the administration, legally speaking, seems to be aiming for a very clear, fixed definition here. They're focusing primarily on the sex listed on an original birth certificate or documentation from birth.
So, like, based on anatomy or chromosomes observed at birth?
Generally, yes. They're drawing a hard legal line. Biological sex, in their view, for this purpose, is fixed at birth and isn't changed by later self-identification or gender identity.
Which sets up this clash, then. The government's view of scientific reality versus an individual's identity.
Precisely. That's the core legal conflict they're presenting.
Okay, what's the second argument?
The second reinforces federal authority. They really emphasize that passports are government property.
Not just mine, even though it has my picture.
Right. The argument is it's a document the government issues and uses for sensitive communication with other governments. Therefore, the federal government gets to decide what information goes on it. It's tied to sovereignty.
Okay, government property. So government control makes sense as an argument. What about the third one? You said it connects to international relations.
Yes, this one's framed as foreign policy injury.
How can an X on my passport hurt U.S. foreign policy? That seems like a stretch.
Well, here's the specific language from Solicitor General Sauer. He argues Judge Kobach's injunction injures the United States because it forces the government to speak to foreign governments in contravention of both the president's foreign policy and scientific reality.
Speak to foreign governments. How?
The logic is this. Other countries rely on U.S. passports for things like border control and security. They expect standardized information. The administration claims that allowing gender markers other than male or female based on birth sex introduces variability.
And that variability creates confusion or risk.
They argue it could create confusion, compromise the trust foreign partners place in U.S. documents, and basically undermine the reliability of American IDs for international security.
So that's the core of the foreign policy angle. It's about international trust and security standards, making it seem like more than just a domestic issue.
Exactly. They're trying to elevate it, make it about national security, foreign relations. And courts, especially the Supreme Court, often give the executive branch more leeway when those areas are invoked. It's a very strategic legal move.
Definitely sounds strategic. Now let's zoom out a bit. You mentioned this isn't happening in a vacuum. If we connect this passport fight to the bigger picture, what else is going on?
Yeah, that context is crucial. The sources we looked at are clear. This passport rule fits into a much broader pattern. It looks like a systemic effort to redefine or maybe restrict how gender identity is recognized across the federal government.
It's not just the State Department, then.
No, not at all. It's a signal of a wider administrative priority.
And the sources mentioned some specific examples, other recent policy changes that line up with this. Can we quickly run through those?
Sure. So beyond passports, you have the revived ban on transgender individuals serving in the military. That's one major piece.
Okay. What else?
Another critical one is the directive about federal prisons that transgender women should be housed in men's facilities.
Which seems to align with the passport rule's logic, focusing on sex assigned at birth for federal classification.
It does align philosophically, yes. And then there are also reports of funding cuts to federal research programs that deal with transgender health and inclusion.
So, military service, housing in prisons, documentation for travel, even research funding. The common theme is this focus on sex assigned at birth as the only recognized category for the federal government.
That's the coordination, the pattern that emerges. And while critics are calling this a clear rollback of LGBTQ+ protections built up over years,
advocates are warning about the real-world impact, right? For you, the person potentially affected by this.
absolutely. This isn't just abstract legal stuff. Identification is key to, well, almost everything in modern life.
How so? What are the tangible harms?
Well, think about international travel. If your passport doesn't match your identity or forces you into a category that doesn't fit, it could put you at real risk crossing borders, especially in countries less accepting of trans people.
That sounds genuinely dangerous.
It could be. And domestically, federal IDs are needed for jobs, healthcare access, education, applying for benefits, housing. If your ID creates a mismatch with who you are, it throws up huge barriers.
So we're talking about potentially tens of thousands of transgender and non-binary Americans, as the sources say, kind of caught in the middle.
Caught between these very different ideas about identity, science, and the power of the state.
Yes, the stakes feel incredibly high. And you said the timeline is urgent. So what happens next? What should you be watching for?
Things could move very fast. The Supreme Court might decide on this emergency request within days, maybe even by the end of this week.
Wow. Okay, so what are the possible immediate outcomes?
Two main possibilities right now. One, the court grants the administration's request.
What happens then?
If they grant it, the birth sex only rule for passports comes back immediately, like instantly. Applications would stop offering the X marker or identity-based options, even while the bigger legal case might continue simmering in lower courts.
Okay, and the second possibility, if they deny the request,
If SCOTUS denies the emergency request, it's a setback for the administration. Judge Kobik's injunction stays in place.
Meaning M, F, and X options remain available for passports.
Yes, the current, more inclusive system continues while the lower courts take more time to review the full merits of the case. A denial would definitely be a blow to that strategy of using the shadow docket for quick policy wins.
But regardless of the immediate passport rule outcome, you're saying this decision has broader significance.
Oh, absolutely. It's much bigger than just passports. This SCOTUS decision, even on the emergency request, will be a huge signal.
A signal about what?
About how willing the Supreme Court is to back the administration's wider push to redefine the federal government's whole stance on gender identity across all agencies, not just the State Department.
So it could set the stage for future fights over military service, prison housing, federal benefits, all those things we mentioned.
Exactly. It tells us whether the court will let the executive branch use the legal system to enforce this very specific, narrow definition of biological sex across the entire federal landscape. It really sets the tone.
So what does this all mean? We've dug into this deep dive, seen the conflict, state power versus individual rights, but you mentioned something earlier about the legal framing of the documents themselves being key.
Yes. This is maybe the most crucial takeaway concept here, the one you really want to mull over. It's how the administration frames these identification documents.
They said forcing them to use an X marker makes the government speak something inaccurate to other countries. Can you just unpack that framing one more time? Why is that specific legal angle so important?
Absolutely, because this is the linchpin. The administration isn't just arguing about data accuracy. They are positioning these documents, passports, in this case, not just as proof of your identity, but as a form of government speech.
Government speech. Like the government is the one talking, not just recording information.
Precisely. And if a court accepts that argument that the passport is the government's statement about you to the world, then the legal ground shifts completely.
How so?
It moves the focus away from your potential constitutional right to self-definition on your ID and towards the government's right to control its own message, its own speech.
So they can argue that being forced to put an X on a passport is like forcing the president or the government to say something they don't agree with.
Exactly. And the government's own speech usually gets a lot of protection from courts telling it what to say. It's a clever way to try and lift the argument out of the realm of individual civil rights and put it squarely into the realm of federal power, sovereign communication, and control over information.
That framing really could change the whole debate for any kind of federal ID going forward.
It fundamentally alters the legal landscape.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay. A really profound difference there, viewing your passport as proof of you versus the government talking about you. Thank you for walking us through all those layers.
Glad we could unpack it.
You'll definitely want to keep a close eye on that SCOTUS decision. As we heard, the implications could spread quickly. That concludes this deep dive.